It's now time to start our journey to the westernmost part of the circle, Bryce National Park. Luckily, the Goblin Valley and Reef National Park are on the way. Once again, to get there, we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking out of the window. But there's always something interesting to see, even on a cloudy day. It's like looking out of the world's largest IMAX screen. From Canyonlands, it's 205 magnificent miles to Capitol Reef National Park. If the sky was clear, from I-70, we'd be looking at the nearly 100-mile-long ridge called the Water Pocket Fold. It's the home of Capitol Reef National Park. Unfortunately, because of the weather, we can only see a dark bump on the horizon. After just 32 miles on the interstate, we turn southwest onto State Highway 24. We're driving near the edge of a large sand area that stretches all the way back to Canyonlands. And in a few places, we get our first look at the small, odd-shaped pinnacles of rock called hoodoos. By the way, this is also how you get to the 4x4 only section of the Maze District of Canyonlands. 96 miles from Moab, we take a 12-mile-long side road to a very weird place. This is the Goblin Valley State Park. Here, layers of sandstone, siltstone, and other sedimentary rock are all eroding at different rates, leaving oddly amusing structures that remind some of goblins, though to others, including myself, they look more like mushrooms. To learn more about how they form, check out the Visitor Center. Even on this gray, drizzly day, it was fun exploring the weirdness. There are no trails or a set route. You're free to just wander. And that's what most people do. When you're down in the valley, the goblins take on a more surreal appearance. The movie Galaxy Quest was shot here because it looked like an alien planet. On the far wall of the valley, you can see the slow erosional process in motion. It looks like the stone is dripping away, and it is. Each time it rains, a little bit of the rock dissolves and drips off. We only had about an hour to explore, but many spent a few days here. There is a small campground, but reservations are recommended. On this day, even though we arrived early, no camp spaces were available. A few miles south of the Goblins, the highway turns to follow the Fremont River up the fold. It's technically called a monocline. 50 to 70 million years ago, rock layers on top of the fold rose 7,000 feet higher than the same layers to the east. If you like geology, the drive itself is worth the trip. This was shot in May, and even in the desert, showers brought many flowers. Capitol Reef is at the top of the fold, in a mostly flat valley that has attracted humans for at least 12,000 years. 8 to 1,200 years ago, some of these left their mark. Just before you get to the Visitor Center, there's a huge petroglyph panel on a sandstone cliff face. Most of the figures resemble humans, though some say they look like men from outer space. As always, stop at the Visitor Center to see if there's anything special going on in the park. It turns out we just missed a blacksmith demonstration in the village historic shop. Exploring the landscape can help you understand how the place got its name. Back in the day, some thought this white rock looked somewhat like the U.S. Capitol building. And a ranger told me that the fold was quite an obstacle to cross for pioneers 100 years ago. And at the time, the word for a large barrier was reef. And that's how we got the name Capitol Reef. It has nothing to do with an ancient sea. White men first settled the area in the 1880s. The first Mormon settlers planted an orchard, and it's still producing fruit. And they called their settlement Fruitia. For photographers, there's more to shoot here than just rocks. There's also a photogenic barn near the town site. The barn and the campground occupy much of the park's level ground. Capitol Reef is really about exploring the backcountry. Several of its dirt roads can be used by passenger cars. However, some are 4x4 only trails. This is one of the park's most visited trails. It's the road to Grand Wash. It's worth stopping along the way, and especially at this junction, where you'll find an old uranium mine from the early 1900s. Here, a miner purified a radioactive powder, and he sold it as a supposedly healthy food supplement. Well, it wasn't. This is a great way to see the canyon. In most cases, you're looking down on a canyon from a high ridge. Here, you're driving through one. And by the way, until World War II, this area was very difficult to get to. You needed a horse and buggy. The first motorized tractor didn't get here until the 1940s, and Highway 24 wasn't paved until 1962. And the walls are full of small holes, or pockets. Water collects in these pockets, and that's how the 100-mile-long ridge got its name, the Water Pocket Fold. After driving a few hours on gravel roads, it's time to get back on the road and head to Bryce. Instead of taking the 100-mile-long 4x4 only Brim Trail, we took the scenic byway, Highway 12. It's only 85 miles from Capitol Reef to Bryce National Park, but you may be compelled to make one more stop before you get there. Highway 12 is a twisty mountain road. At Boulder Pass, it reaches 9,600 feet. Then the road twists along the top of petrified sand dunes, called Hell's Backbone. There's a great view of it at a pullout called Boynton Overlook. It provides a great view of an ancient Sahara-like desert that somehow has been turned to stone. It's hard to find words to describe Bryce Canyon. Colorful is one, bizarre might be another. But the best is, well, it's just a place you have to see for yourself. It lies on the top step of the Grand Staircase, where loose rock is easily washed away by rain and 200 freeze and thaw cycles per year. The result is the tall spires called hoodoos. Bryce is at a higher elevation than the parks on the east side of the circle. The park road here is between 8,000 and 9,000 feet up, and the temperatures are much cooler. On this day in early May, the morning temperature was 14 degrees Fahrenheit. 8 inches of snow fell a few days earlier. The elevation and very clean air make this a great place for stargazing. You can see 3 times as many stars here as you can in most places in the U.S. The park has star watching parties on a regular basis. Photographing stars is difficult, and it's a skill I haven't quite mastered. It's not a large park, and most viewpoints are just off the main road. The canyon, well, it isn't technically a canyon. Geologists call these theaters. They mostly open up to the east, so there's very few points where the sun actually hits the hoodoos. This is the view from Rainbow Point. Because the air is so clear, on most days you can see well over 90 miles. And on very clear days, like this one, you can see up to 200 miles to the horizon. Before the Industrial Revolution, well, this is how most people saw the world. Every few miles there's a pullout to another viewpoint. This feature is called Natural Bridge. Well, it's actually not a bridge. Bridges are eroded by rivers. Frost and rain wore away the soft iron-rich rock in this case, making this an arch. Erosion here occurs at a rapid rate. This tree is about 100 years old. When it was young, its roots were covered with soil. So, in less than 100 years, more than a foot of soil has been washed and blown away. Because of the extreme elevation changes, there are 3 climatic zones in the park, and a wide variety of wildlife, like this small bird. But if you have better luck than us, you may be able to see one of the rare and much larger California condors that live in the area. There are several trails in the park that anyone with proper hiking boots should try at least one. We decided on the Navajo Loop, starting from Sunset Point. The trail is only 1.3 miles long, and it quickly drops 550 feet to the canyon floor, where it connects to several other trails. Sunny parts of the trail were dry, but shaded areas were sticky and muddy, and I soon learned why the rangers at the visitor center were so concerned about the type of boots I was wearing. They highly recommended that only boots with big lugs be worn. I'm glad that's what I have, because it's quite slick. After the tunnel, the trail turned to snow and ice. As you descend, the size of the hoodoos become apparent. Forgive the shaky camera here, but the trail gets very narrow, and the tripod would barely fit through the narrow opening. I was also a bit distracted, wondering how that ponderosa pine got there, and how was it able to grow so tall in such a confined space? We're almost to the valley floor. On the valley floor, it's pretty obvious that we're in a different climate zone. Not only has it opened up, but there's a surprising number of trees down here, and there are several miles of trails, so we decided to take one. It's hard to remember that you're still 7,500 feet above sea level, until you look at the sky. It's a deeper shade of blue up here. The occasional clearing provides an impressive view of the 500-foot cliff you just walked down. Eventually, it was time to start the muddy climb back up. The mud was not only slick, but it also built up on the boots and made them heavy. Going up the equivalent of a 50-story high-rise in muddy boots doesn't make the journey any easier. The tripod quickly doubled as a hiking pole. It made the hike up the hill much easier. The trail is close to the canyon walls, and they almost look like they're melting. In a way, they are. Each time it rains or snows, a little of the rock exfoliates and drips off the walls. The good news is, the higher we go, the better the view. The last couple of switchbacks are long sweepers, above most of the hoodoos, providing a great view of the park's most famous hoodoo, Thor's Hammer. At the top, at Sunrise Point, there's a nice view of the valley. There are several other trails in the park, but if you're looking for a moderate hike that gets you into the hoodoos, we recommend the Navajo Loop. The western portion of the Grand Circle is characterized by odd terrain on a smaller scale than what we saw in the Four Corners and in the Moab area. It's easier to feel more connected to the landscape when you walk among the mushrooms and goblins that are only a few feet above your head. It's also easier to see erosional forces at work here. In the Four Corners, everything is huge and seemingly permanent. Here, you witness the effects of weather and time, giving many a better sense of how their actions shape the environment. Most Grand Circle tours include a trip to nearby Zion National Park. It's a great place to go and really deserves to be explored for several days, and we just don't have the time. So we're off to Lake Powell and Page, Arizona. If you're in the mood for a side trip, or if the Bryce campground is full, check out Kodachrome Basin State Park. Its red rock is less than 30 miles from the Bryce entrance. In the early days of color photography, Kodachrome slide film was the best way to capture the vibrant colors of the rock, so the state of Utah named the park after the film. There are plenty of hiking trails here, and in the summer, trail rides and other activities are available. The road to Kodachrome Basin has many photo opportunities. The landscape is rugged, and there's no shortage of photogenic old farmhouses and outbuildings. Here's another travel option. If for whatever reason you're not interested in going to Bryce, perhaps because there's snow on the pass on Highway 12, or if you need to cut your trip short, there's a shortcut from the Goblin Valley back to the Four Corners. And there's plenty of nice stops along the way. From the Goblin Valley, it's only about 90 minutes to Natural Bridges National Monument. In the Visitor Center, you learned that in 1883, a prospector who was looking for gold near the Colorado River, he didn't find any gold, but what he found was 3 large bridges made of stone. Today, they're the main features of Natural Bridges National Monument. It's here that I learned the difference between an arch and a bridge. Bridges are formed by streams and rivers. Arches are eroded from the side due to wind and frost and other types of erosion. On this May Day, the weather was cold. It even started to sleet, which made it difficult to even see the bridges. If you look carefully, you can see the top of one. It takes less than an hour to drive the park's loop road to each of the 3 bridges. The next 70 miles to the now familiar Mexican Hat feature a couple of more treats. A few miles from the monument, head south on Highway 261. You'll pass the extreme east end of Lake Powell, which is formed by the controversial Glen Canyon Dam across the Colorado River in Page, Arizona. The lake is about 100 feet lower than it used to be, due to several years of low rain and snowfall. About 10 miles from Mexican Hat, there's another treat. It's an old mining road called the Moki Dugway. The signs approaching it are rather intimidating. On a clear day, the view might be fantastic. On a rainy one, you just see the potential. By this time, the sleet had turned to rain, so I continued even though the pavement doesn't. In 3 miles, the well-graded switchbacks drop 1,100 feet from the top of Cedar Mesa. By the way, the state of Utah recommends that vehicles and RVs longer than 28 feet not attempt to negotiate this steep 10% grade. The gravel was relatively smooth, and there was never an out-of-control moment. And on the way down, there's more good news. The cell phone started working. We had 0 bars for quite some time. When the road levels out, you're driving through the Valley of the Gods. It's a smaller version of nearby Monument Valley. A dirt road meanders through it, and on a clear day, it's well worth the trip. And to the east, we can now see the familiar site of Rapley Ridge and Mexican Hat, indicating that we're back in the Four Corners.